important these services are, and they're starting to open them up, but they're still putting those parameters on them, right? You can only have 50 people in a room. You can only do this, you know, and I get why it's there, because you don't need to have somebody show up with COVID and then infect 50 people with COVID. I get it. So thankfully, because there's a lot of, you know, the weather has been nice in Vancouver, but today's kind of really cold and rainy. People have been holding meetings outside because there's lots of park space. Stanley Park, we have Queen's Park. There's a lot of, you know, it's not like Toronto where like there's not a lot of outdoor space for people to go chill out and have a meeting. Like I think Cawthra Square, you could probably have a couple people, but even now they've done so much gentrifying of that park. Like a lot of the grass area has been used to do the AIDS monument and plant nice trees, and it looks lovely, but it's taken that space away where you could probably get 10 or 12 people to sit and be like, you know, to have a meeting of a 12-step meeting, you only need you and one other alcoholic to do that, right? But it's important, yeah.
But no, not to cut you off, but where, now, you know, a lot of these support workers don't want to work because they know that most of the time marginalized people or people that are seeking desperate help, in a sense, are probably carrying some form of a STD or some disease or some kind of concerning something, in a sense. And where do you think the government's going to get these workers that normally would be, because they feel like they're in a safe environment normally, but for them to know that, like you said, the COVID is out there, where do you think the government's going to get these workers?
So I've actually noticed, and thankfully, most of the hospital staff and support workers have been working, and that is because we have been given additional money to work. So we are getting we are getting at the end of August what is called the COVID top up, which is where you'll have earned a maximum of $3,500 additional pay from the work you've done, depending on the hours, from March 15th until July 15th, and you'll be paid at the end of August. So people at first were hesitant to work, but then when they were like, oh, I'm being paid $6 more an hour, I'm going back to work. So thankfully, you know, places like, you know, Community Connect Toronto and stuff like that, their workers, apparently they've had exceptional attendance records. This is the best, their executive director said. It's amazing what you can do when you're offering extra money. Now, so thankfully, people thought that support workers and jail guards were going to be the biggest concern, but once they sort of financially gave a financial incentive for showing up to work, that sort of changed it. One of my dear friends works at the provincial jail in Burlington, and he said, you know, the problem is not showing up to work. The problem is explaining to the inmates that their visitations are canceled until this is done. Which for me is kind of, you know, I understand the side of why they're not allowed to come. But when you're dealing with a person who's in jail, and you like even their first time, or whether they're doing life on installment, it is important that they maintain contact with their families, right?
Well, you know, it's for me, I find there's a lot of gaps in between a lot of trying to get people services, trying to make a decision about where we are with the pandemic, which group of people it's affecting the most, who are most likely to succumb to catching the virus, who's more likely to spread the virus. And at the end of the day, there's a big gap between the doctors, the nurses, the support workers, government. And like I said, is that we need some sort of essentials for people that are marginalized in a sense. But when people are in their homes, you would think doctors and nurses, or some nurses, would be knocking on doors.
Right.
Now, what I found was that if you know where these people are, and you know that they're home, And you know that 9 times out of 10, they're safe in their homes. But I think there needs to be some sort of a visitation, a knock on the door to say, are you okay? Because like you said, the virtual thing is not working. And it works for some people, but it doesn't work for, I would say, 90% of the people, because most people, and mainly older people, don't even know how to use a computer.
Right.
So for them to try to do virtual meetings, whether they're, because there's a lot of older people in the shelters, a lot of older people that do drugs, a lot of young people that just don't care that they're in the situation that they're in. And they're not going to just pick up a phone and say, I need help, this and that. They're going to go back to the same routine that they're used to doing, hanging out in the community and looking for a quick fix.
Right.
Now,
And that.
Now, I just want to bring up a couple of things, and then you can run it down for me. Like I said, there's a lot of people are going to try to go back to their old ways, and it comes back really quick when you're isolated or there's no services and no help for you. Now we're going to see certain things like the sex addiction. The bathhouses are closed, where a lot of gay men would have probably been socializing and doing drugs in something that they thought was a safe environment. 2, the gay bars, only seating 50 people. Now, these are alcoholics that attend bars on a regular basis or want to go there and see their favorite queen, and they just have an intention to drink just a little bit more than you.
Go see Scarlett for their 12 o'clock beer.
Hello. Now we're going to see a rise in evictions, because the government has now said that the landlord and tenant board can proceed now with evicting people. Also, the work situation in this pandemic, with a lot of the businesses closing, there's no real numbers of how many businesses have really closed and how many people are really out of work. But I do understand them when they talk about the evictions, and that the money that they have given to the majority of us to help us along. Now, I'm not saying that people should be evicted from their homes, but the fact that the government gave you $2,000 extra a month or whatever it was, which should have carried you for 3 months or 4 months in this pandemic that we have been going through. What do you think needs to happen now? What do you think should happen with the evictions? Let's talk about that for a minute.
So, that is such a loaded question, because under normal circumstances, I would say you haven't paid your rent, you need to go. Now, we have just 6 months into a pandemic. We have the highest unemployment rate that we've had in probably since the 30s, when the dirty 30s hit. People literally have no jobs, and they're given this $2,000 a month. Now, when somebody is making $3,500 a month or more, and then they have to live off of $2,000, and their rent is $1,800. I think that we need to have a bit of compassion for that. And, in BC, what has happened is people have 2 years to pay back the rent that they owe.